Hello?
Thank you, Chairman. Declarations of interest have been received from Councillor Goodridge, who declared a non-registrable interest in item 8.2, as he lives close to the site and will leave the chamber during consideration of this item. Councillor Baker declared a non-registrable interest in item 9.1 due to a conflict of interest and will leave the chamber during the consideration of this item.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members of the public or from members?
None received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Matt, have we got any relative updates to government guidance or legislation since our last meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. No, there are no updates.
Very good. So we move on to the main meat of the meeting. Applications for planning permission. And the first one is item 8.1, reference WA 2021 02855, land at Titwillow, Ham Lane, Elstead. And the proposal is for the erection of extensions and alterations following demolition of existing garage and carport. And I would like Wanda to present the application, please.
Was earlier. We have practiced this, and for some reason it's not doing what it was doing earlier. Even that's not showing. Have we got anybody who understands the laptop system here? No, we've been unzoomed. That's what's happened, I think.
Well, we know what to do if there's a fire.
So this is the location plan for the application site. We're on Ham Lane, which, for those of you who know, Elstead is a rather narrow, almost private road that's slightly to the north of the settlement. We're within the settlement boundaries, and the neighbourhood is residential. So the adjacent neighbours are the chalet bungalows at Little Platts and Toby Dean. And the reason the application has been called in is because of the number of objections raised from the neighbours in response to the proposal. So I'm just showing you now an aerial view of the site where we can see that the application site is in a residential street of plots of similar size, where there are front amenity spaces largely used for parking and rear amenity spaces largely used for garden area. You can see the Milford Road crossing at the bottom, and you can see that the road is significantly narrower than the Milford Road. So there is in fact passing places for two vehicles, but it's not always dual carriageway on that road. So the next slide is the site photos, which shows you the application site at the top. That's Titwillow at Chalet Bungalow. And to the right-hand side, you've got the neighbour to the west, which is Toby Dean. And on the left-hand side, you can see that the adjacent neighbour to the east, which is Little Platts. And they are both chalet bungalows of different styles. And Little Platts is currently enjoying some further improvements, having recently been extended. From the rear, you've got the front, the top picture showing Titwillow. The relevance of the picture on the right-hand side at the bottom is to show you the configuration of the relationships of the rear elevations of the two neighbours, Little Platts to the east and Titwillow, which is just on the west of it. And then on the bottom left picture, you can see Toby Dean, and you can see that Toby Dean has adjacent the boundary. There are garden outbuildings, and there is an elevation with a gable that comes towards the boundary. And the rear of Titwillow has a conservatory which will be removed as part of the proposals. And you can just see here some garden sheds and the rear of an existing garage, which will also be incorporated into the proposed extensions. On the opposite side of the road, we have more bungalows, some of which I think have got chalet accommodation. At least they have a roof light in one of them. And they are separated by a relatively wide stretch of the road, because on that curve there is a passing place. So at this point, the road is sufficiently wide to take two cars. So the proposed block plan shows you the relationship between the boundary on the right-hand side with Little Platts to the east, and the relationship with the boundary to Toby Dean on the left. Toby Dean on the west-hand side has a garage outbuilding. There is underneath where there's drawn parking for a car, there is currently an existing carport and a single garage. And to the front, the plot is actually slightly larger than shown, but there is marked on this particular plot a plan where the lines of the application site, sufficient parking at the front for two vehicles. The cross hatching that's going from right at the top to left at the bottom is proposed. So at the front, we've got a proposed single-story extension, which will have a gable and will provide first or half a floor additional accommodation and roof. To the rear, there's a 1.5-story rear extension, and to the side, there's a single-story side extension, which wraps around to the rear. That's the proposal. I'm showing you now the front and the rear elevation of the existing and the proposed. what is proposed on the front is to change an existing small gable into a larger gable extension, which will create a more of a more enlarged porch area. Then a second gable created, and then the roof will be altered, and above there will be a dormer. So on the front elevation at first floor level, there'll be 2 extra windows. On the rear elevation, the roof form will be maintained, the same pitch will be maintained, but the roof form will rise at the eaves and will provide 3 dormers to provide light into proposed bedrooms in the roof, which we'll see when we see the plans. On the boundary with Little Dean, there is a single story which has a dual pitch roof, and that's providing extra living accommodation. And I think that we have a gym and a snug on that side. The side elevations, the northeast side is the side that the neighbour at Little Platts would see as it looked on. As you'll see on the ground floor, there'll be no additional fenestration except for a small entrance door with a small window on the ground floor and 2 roof lights at the first floor level. The existing front elevation will be maintained, but the roof form will change. There will be a gable ended as opposed to a half-hipped roof, and that will be slightly higher than the existing single-story roof, and will be lower than the existing roof. At no point will the roof ridge change from what is existing, but it will be extended back towards the rear at the same height, and then there will be a hipped roof form dropping down to provide the rear extension. On the southwest side elevation, there are 3 roof lights in the single story element, which is providing the snug and gym area. And there's 1 roof light in the main roof extension of the rear part of the elevations. And at the front, you'll see that the gable again is shown with the height that is lower than the existing roof. So on the floor plans, we'll see on the ground floor, there were originally 2 bedrooms on the ground and a living room and conservatory and the garage to the rear. Where the garages will become a snug, which will extend into the dining kitchen extension at the rear. To the front, 1 bedroom, bedroom number 2 will become a study, and the living room that was set back from the front elevation of bedroom 2 will become a living room, and will have the same front elevation. The single bedroom and shower room on the first floor in the loft accommodation area will be expanded bedroom and 4 additional bedrooms, bathroom and shower room. And at the bottom of that drawing, you can see bedrooms 3, 5, 2 marked with their gables, which are looking towards the rear. And you'll see bedroom 4, which will look out into the front amenity space. And the master bedroom will have a window in a dormer window in the gable, which will look out onto the front amenity space. So the main matters for consideration now are the design and impact on visual amenity, the impact on residential amenity, and the impact on parking. Becomes almost apparently a 2-story house. And from residential amenity, there are concerns about additional overlooking, overshadowing and loss of light. Parking was a concern. The applicant has provided since a parking plan which shows the parking, and we have not had further objections on that subject since that plan was submitted. That's the presentation then.
Thank you, Wanda. I don't know what the musical accompaniment is, but it's quite nice, isn't it? It reminds me of the Queen and Paddington. This application is subject to public speaking, and the first speaker I've got is Michelle Gordon to speak on behalf of the objectors. Is she there?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Wonderful. So before we get started, I'm just going to take a deep breath and I'll read the statement that's been prepared. So I'm speaking on behalf of the residents of Ham Lane who have objected to the proposed planning application, specifically in the impact on the residents at Toby Dean. It is noted and sadly acknowledged that the planning officer has submitted granting planning permission to the current plans for Titwillow. Although the planning officer's report states that there are no overbearing impacts to Toby Dean owing to the extension being directly alongside the single-storey garage, the planning officer did not acknowledge the extension that will continue beyond the garage to the front of the property. Toby Dean has a window next to their garage, and the extension to Titwillow will impact the natural light that comes through that window into the room. The natural window is essential and required by the current homeowners of Toby Dean. A resident of Toby Dean is registered disabled and partially sighted. The natural light is essential for the resident to use their remaining limited sight. If the natural light reduces further, this means the homeowners will use artificial light during the daylight hours to pursue day-to-day activities. Referring to a very simple real-life example, the impact of lack of light has always been sadly demonstrated through the simple act of increasing the volume of 6-foot fence panels along the boundary, leaving previously strong flourishing plants by the garage of Toby Dean lacking and in need of light. The extension will be even higher than those 6-foot panels, restricting light into the room. The report did not acknowledge the issue of increased damp that would be caused by the proposed extension in the garage, lounge and bedroom, leading to further detrimental impact to Toby Dean. It will also mean that the ground outside the property will remain slippery, further enhancing the challenges for a partially sighted person with mobility issues. For the homeowner to overcome each of these factors, it will mean there will be a significant additional cost to themselves on top of the already cost of living crisis. An overall environmental impact of the proposed development will be the increased light pollution through the excessive number of total 11 skylights emitting more artificial light. The current owners of Toby Dean are not clear how close to the boundary the proposed extension will be. They continue to question how the extension will be built and maintained, specifically around guttering, etc. for maintenance when on the common boundary. The homeowners of Toby Dean wish to be noted that no access will not be granted from their land to build or maintain Titwillow under any circumstances. I have also taken the time to look at the plans. Both the location plan and the amended block plan for Titwillow do not reflect the correct boundaries for Toby Dean. It assumes the boundary at the rear of the property ends at the same point of Titwillow. This has been ratified by Land Registry as being incorrect. Moving on to the broader issue of converting another 3-bedroom bungalow to a 5-bedroom property, the residents have already witnessed the overwhelming property development and expansion of dwellings in the roads of Elsted, which fortunately until now, Ham Lane has not been impacted. Many residents have moved into Ham Lane over the last 40 plus years to properties that meet their requirements and have access to the village facilities. Many have downsized to the properties in the lane as they do not wish to have the large properties to maintain. Elsted does not have many 2 to 3 properties available for both young families and older population looking to downsize. Elsted flourishes because of the diverse age groups who get to enjoy shared experiences. Another large single development means that these groups are unable to afford to live in a diverse village. In summary, the granting of this planning permission will financially impact both the current homeowners of Toby Dean and open the floodgate for the conversion of the remaining bungalows and chalet bungalows in Ham Lane, thus driving long-standing residents out of the village.
Thank you. Good timing as well. I'd now invite Laura Lambert to speak in support of the application. Leaving.
Good evening. My name is Laura Lambert and I am the applicant and owner of Titwillow, along with my husband Adam and our 3 children. Adam and I have lived within Waverley our whole lives, with my family home of 36 years still being in Milford. We have strong connections to Elsted, and this is an area that we have both grown up in and call home. We brought Titwillow in February of 2021 as an exciting project. an opportunity to create a forever family home, having worked our way up the property ladder over the last 15 years. Titwillow is a 1958 chalet bungalow now in dire need of modernisation and renovation. The plans that we have submitted have been very thoughtfully drawn up. Titwillow will remain a chalet bungalow. As stated, the ridge height of the bungalow will remain the same. By taking the hip to gable on the left front elevation, we will be matching the style of our immediate neighbour to the right, Toby Dean. And by bringing forward the front right elevation in line with the left elevation, we will match the extension just added to Little Platts, our other immediate neighbour to the left, therefore fitting very nicely into the street scene and character of the road. We sadly feel that the number of objections to our application are in fact due to personal issues, not legitimate planning concerns, largely drummed up by one neighbour and his clipboard. In 2020, said neighbour of Little Platts, in fact, put in for planning permission for a 2-storey rear extension to their property to create a 4-bedroomed house. Not a single neighbour in the street objected to this application. Elstead Parish Council were even in favour of the application. The application was refused and later withdrawn. Most objections relate to an outbuilding to the rear of our back garden that complies with permitted development and therefore not included in this application. There are concerns over parking. The site plan shows ample parking for 3 vehicles, which meets the planning requirements for the size of property. In reality, you can easily park 6 vehicles on the driveway. This will not be affected by the proposed extensions. There will also be no increase to traffic. We have been very careful in the design as to not to create any unacceptable overshadowing to neighbours' properties. Little Platts have expressed concern over blocking light from their solar panels. I think it important that you note they don't have any solar panels. With regards to overlooking, as covered in the officer's report, the level of overlooking does not exceed that of what it currently is. We have, however, whilst re-landscaping the back garden, planted a row of pleach trees to the right side boundary and singular trees to the left, which in time will drastically reduce any overlooking at all. In response to Michelle's comments, there is currently a 6-foot fence that runs the boundary to the front of our property, which is permitted and does currently block light to the said window that she is concerned with. I don't have much else to say, so thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Now ask the ward councillor, Councillor Jenny Else, to speak, please.
Thank you very much. So I'm ward councillor for Elstead, Thursley and Brook. Ham Lane is a rural byway in Elstead. It consists of small bungalows on the south side, with the north side a mix of bungalows and houses behind well-established and well-kept high hedges. The south side of Ham Lane was built as small detached 2-bedroom bungalows, some now enlarged to 3-bed by loft conversions, including the odd roof light or small proportionate dormer window. All the bungalows, when viewed from Ham Lane, still have the original appearance and proportions. These small bungalows have, since they were first built in the 1950s, provided suitable small homes for young families and older people seeking to downsize. We can all appreciate how important such properties are to maintaining the lifeblood of all communities, especially perhaps our 27 villages where development land is at such a premium. One very important aspect that I would like to emphasise is that in 2020, the immediate neighbour discussed with Waverley a potential extension to their bungalow, enlarging the roof space to provide 2 bedrooms and a small bathroom. And after a long consultation, the planning officer informed the owners that the proposal was too large, not in keeping with the surroundings, and that the proposed flat roof element was also too large. This application that you are considering tonight, which is one in a row of 13 similar bungalows, is to enlarge a similar bungalow into a 2-storey, 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom house with a much larger flat roof element, which surprisingly, just 2 years later, is now deemed worthy of permission. I hope the officers will tell us that the first proposal cannot be considered in your deliberations this evening, quite rightly, but it must surely resonate as a contradictory decision. Waverley planners are very keen to emphasise in the update sheet issued today that the proposals will result in a dwelling of 1.5 stories, but a first floor extension providing 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms and a dressing room very obviously results in a 2-storey house, even if disguised as a bungalow front and back. What has happened in the last 2 years to result in a complete U-turn on what is and what is not acceptable? Can this inconsistency be explained for the benefit of the committee, please? This is not satisfactory. In addition, it is not a fair conclusion to something which has caused immense distress to many residents of this rural lane, which is actually not even a highway, but a rural byway in the village of Elstead. 9 objections have been received from residents in the immediate area of Ham Lane, plus a substantial objection from the parish council. We hear that neighbour opinion is going to be an important element of new planning laws, which is something I firmly believe in and have often expressed in the past. Elstead is in desperate need of smaller homes, should not be allowed to become a village full of 4 and 5 bedroom homes inappropriately sited with no hope for younger families or for older people wishing to downsize. I ask that you consider carefully the impact that this development will undoubtedly have not only upon the residents of Ham Lane, but also on the future sustainability of the village as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Wilson.
Having looked at the location plan, the actual footprint of this property does not seem to be tremendously different from the footprint of the other buildings in the lane. And I think that somebody who has 3 children is looking to keep their family in their locality. So on consideration, and thinking that the actual frontage looks as though it would fit quite well into the visual aspect of the lane, I think on balance, I'm in favour of granting the application.
Thank you. It's worth noting that the location plan shows the houses as they are at the moment, not as extended. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. I was listening to Councillor Else actually, and I have to agree with her. The fact of the matter is we are losing our small properties in the villages, which everybody wants to do. They all want to bring families into the village and have 4 and 5 bedroom houses, but we are losing something for our elderly folk to downsize to, which is something that we're seeing a lot of out in my own villages. And I would be very sad to lose a small property which could be used by a start-up family or elderly people wishing to downsize. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment? No, well, we'll go straight to the recommendation then. And the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 and 2 and informatives 1 and 2. Could you please indicate if you are in favour of that recommendation? Thank you. Those against? Abstain.
Thank you, Chairman. That was 6 votes for, 4 against and 1 abstention.
Thank you. So the permission is granted. We'll move on to the next item, which is land. Sorry. Okay. Right, the next item is 8.2, reference WA 2022-00412, land at Tangley Stables, Wannish, and Councillor Goodridge has left the room as he's declared an interest. The proposal is erection of a dwelling and detached garage following demolition of existing equestrian buildings. And this follows an invalid application, reference 2021-03169. Lara, would you like to present the application, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm that you can hear me? Okay. This application proposes the erection of a detached dwelling and garage following the demolition of the existing equestrian buildings at Tangley Stables. This slide shows the location plan with the application site outlined in red and the applicant's wide ownership shown by the blue line. Access to the site is gained from an equestrian track off Little Tangley. This slide shows an aerial photograph of the site with the application site shown centrally. The photograph demonstrates the vast tree cover to the west of the proposed dwelling between the application site and the B2128. This slide shows the proposed block plan with the existing equestrian buildings due to be demolished outlined in red and the existing hard standing outlined in orange. The existing line of tree cover is also shown to the south, which is to be retained. This slide shows some site photographs taken from the access point, both looking towards the site and also back towards the B2128. The next slide shows the existing equestrian buildings on the left-hand side and the tree cover on the right-hand side. These next two slides show the existing elevations. On the left-hand side of the screen, there's a miniature block plan of the site with the corresponding elevation shown on the right-hand side. All of the buildings shown on these two slides are to be demolished. The next slide shows the proposed elevations of both the dwelling and the garage. The dwelling would be single-storey in nature and would be of a similar height to the existing buildings shown on site at present. The next slide shows the existing floor plan on the left and the proposed floor plan for the dwelling and the garage on the right-hand side. The key matters for consideration today are the impact on the greenbelt, the impact on the AGLV, and the impact on residential amenity. Officers are recommending approval of the application subject to relevant conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lara. Again, we're subject to public speaking, and I would invite Darius Ardasharan, apologies if I've mispronounced your surname, to speak in support of the application.
Just making sure you can hear me okay. Just making sure you can hear me okay. Yeah. Good evening. My name is Darius Ardasharan from Planet Consulting, and we are the agents for this planning application at Tangley Stables. The application is for the replacement of the stables facilities with a new residential dwelling that is not materially larger than the existing stables buildings. The applicant and the architect have developed a high-quality designed home that is modest in size and sensitive to the defining characteristics of the locality. I'd like to thank the officers for their positive report and cooperation during the course of the application. We agree with their assessment and conclusions, having regard to the relevant national and local planning policies. I'll just run through a few of the key points, but in terms of the principle of development, in summary, the principle, it is acceptable in this instance, as it states within the National Planning Policy Framework. This point is confirmed in the committee report. The existing stables are by definition previously developed land, which the NPPF supports the redevelopment of within the Greenbelt. The key consideration in this respect is to ensure the replacement building is not materially larger than the existing buildings. And the architects have carefully designed the dwelling to ensure it is not materially larger than the existing buildings it replaces by matching the volume and the areas of the buildings. And we believe the dwelling, in fact, represents an improvement to openness of the Greenbelt by consolidating the built form, which reduces urban sprawl. In terms of design and character impact, the properties within the ADLV, but not within the AONB. Sensitive design approach has been adopted, having regard to the special significance of the landscape. The building has been designed to be modest in size and single-storey in height, with a traditional rural appearance, including brick and timber walls, a slated pitch roof, and limited glazing. As a result, the building will not be overly prominent in the landscape, especially as it's replacing existing buildings of a similar design and appearance. In our view, the high-quality design of the replacement building will in fact result in an enhancement to the character and appearance of the area. The amenity impacts of the proposal, there are no material adverse impacts. There's no impacts in terms of building bulk, loss of light or overshadowing or loss of privacy. The vehicle activity associated with a small dwelling would not result in material harm to neighbouring amenity, considering there is an existing access track in place that is used by the existing stables. In terms of the boundary treatment, the applicants have always had the intention to use a natural hedging boundary treatment rather than closed bordered timber fencing. This follows Council's recommendation in the report, which suggests the use of hedging. In terms of light spill, officers have recommended a condition to submit a lighting management plan to ensure that they can retain control over any potential light spill. It is worth noting that there are existing floodlights at the property, and therefore their replacement with the proposed dwelling will result in a reduction in light pollution at the property. The amount of glazing has been reduced to limit light spill, but it is important to note that a minimum amount of glazing is necessary in order to provide sufficient natural light and ventilation to offer adequate quality living conditions for the future occupants of the dwelling. And this is a policy requirement for new dwellings. In summary, we believe that the application represents a great use of previously developed land, and the high quality design enhances the local setting. And thank you for the opportunity to speak in support of this application.
Thank you. Now I'll ask Councillor Chris Crouch of Wantage Parish Council to address us, please.
Thank you. Wantage Parish Council has two main points. First, we want to ask councillors to take a more robust view than the officers' report on the impact of the proposed development on the openness of the green belt and its impact on the AGLV. And second, we continue to be concerned about the precedent this development will set if approved. In considering the issue of the impact on the green belt, our starting point was to ask, if the application for a dwelling was not to replace stables, would it be supported? The answer, it would seem, would be a resounding no, as it would almost certainly be inappropriate development in the green belt. Stables, of course, might be approved on the basis that they fit within the exemption for outdoor sport and recreation. It seems at best curious that an application now to replace stables by a dwelling can somehow make it appropriate development. Inserting an intermediate step of erecting stables should not legitimise a proposal that will not be supported on its own. Obviously, we all need to work within the restraints of planning law, even if the result is odd or illogical. However, we would argue that officers have taken a too narrow view of the impact of the application on the openness of the green belt in comparison to the existing development. It appears to be accepted that openness should be perceived considering both visual and spatial impact. The change of use from stables to a dwelling will mean the buildings will be read as permanent and inhabited rather than ephemeral and an adjunct to the rural use of the land. This in itself will completely change the visual impact. In other words, changing the use of a building can change the visual impact of the building with a consequent impact on the openness of the green belt. In this case, the stables are still performing their intended function, and we have seen nothing to suggest why this should change. The application therefore ought to be refused on the basis that it will have a greater impact on the openness of the green belt than the existing development. On the issue of precedent, we note the officer's comments. However, if this application is allowed, it will set a precedent for applications for conversion of agricultural and recreational rural buildings, redundant or otherwise. Potentially, this will have an adverse effect on the openness of the green belt. Councillors should therefore take this opportunity to conserve existing agricultural and recreational buildings, particularly when it can be used for its original purpose. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillors. Councillor Denis.
Thank you, Chair. To me, this is quite a simple application because it is in the green belt, it's outside the rural settlement, and it's in AGLV. So it's three very important things for me, and something I think as a committee we've valued over the years to protect our green belt and AGLV. I'm grateful for both speakers, but I think Councillor Crouch had a couple of points which I probably just want to reiterate. So the impact on the green belt, it states that we need to protect inappropriate development and will not be permitted unless very special circumstances can be demonstrated. So I haven't seen that at all. And I do accept, I think it was raised by the support about paragraph 149, which talks about redundant buildings or in continuing use. But it does say under paragraph 149G, not to have a greater impact on the openness of the green belt than the existing development. And I think sticking a great big house, whether it's bigger in mass compared to rural buildings, will have a significant impact. So I have real concerns about the green belt and the impact on the AGLV, and I think we should be protecting that with everything we can. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Costa.
I wonder if you can indulge me a little, Chairman. I'd like to reserve comments on this application, but I'd like to raise an issue that's been identified in this report, which I think has a wider significance. And I'd refer to paragraph 10, which deals with the 5-year housing land supply. At our last meeting, we had all this data given to us about the fact that even on our own admission, we now don't have a 5-year housing land supply. The difference between what's written here and what appeared in our reports last time is that the reports last time then went on to say that this effectively triggered the tilted balance and warned us of the higher threshold that we had to apply in these circumstances. And I'd like to understand why that doesn't appear here. Is it that we're now going to consider these somehow on a case-by-case basis, which does seem a bit odd to me, or has somebody somewhere taken a decision that data, that information, and that advice to this committee will not appear in future planning reports? I do accept that we may not have the relevant person here to address that. We may have this evening, but I would request that through you, we are advised on that, because I think it's a really quite important matter for this committee to be aware of. It just doesn't make sense to me. As I say, I do have a few comments on the application, which I'm happy to make after others have spoken.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Officers, would any of you like to comment on that? Matt.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Councillor Costa is absolutely correct. That should have still been in this report. I can only apologise that it's been omitted, but the tilted balance, as you rightly suggested, is a consideration in this particular case. And that the information you provided last time has not changed. We haven't suddenly met our 5-year land supply. Thank you, Chairman.
No, I'll make some comments now just on the application. I only want to comment on that I accept that, and I know these things do happen, but if we could have an assurance that that does appear, because I think it does affect, you know, our judgments. We're told it's an important consideration and we should be aware of it in each report. Okay, on this particular application, my inclination when I first read this was very similar to Councillor Denis. I have to say, I don't think it's a huge mass suddenly appearing in relation to the stables. My understanding is it's pretty much the same bulk, and depending on how you measure it, it's pretty much the same sort of size. the significant issue to me has always been sticking houses in, you know, isolation that stick out like a sore thumb in the middle of the green belt and AONB and so on. If I just finish this, and if I might, I just was a bit bemused in that sense by the I think, what was it, the Braintree judgment or something. I have to say it is not a judgment I would have made, but I'm not the judge, and I am told that we have to take account of it. It does appear as though it would be a bit of an isolated dwelling to me, but I would find it very difficult to vote again when we have that judgment put before us and effectively told that if that's what the courts are saying, we would be in some difficulty if we wanted to take, as I do, a different view about it. So unless I can hear something very persuasive from colleagues, I think the officer's recommendations are probably sound on this and we need to follow them.
Barry, did you wish to say something?
I'm just going to try and interpret paragraph 11 on tilted balance, which is sometimes if it's opaque. The tilted balance applies unless where there are no relevant development plan policies or the policies which are most important for determining the application are out of date, which is the case here because we don't have 5-year housing allowance. So the tilted balance does apply, but there's an important proviso. Unless the application of the policies in this framework, so the NPPF on Greenbelt and AONB and other special areas, provides a clear reason for refusing the development. So unless the Greenbelt policies, as they are engaged here, provide a clear reason for refusal, if they do, then the tilted balance does not apply. If there is no clear engagement of Greenbelt matters, then the tilted balance does apply. Is that cool? I'm sorry, Councillor Costa. There are so many double negatives in National Planning Policy framework.
Thank you, Chair. I think my concerns would echo Councillor Denis's. I looked at this report and I thought Greenbelt, AGLV, and then I saw that I'm assuming that because the stables were permitted under recreational use in the Greenbelt, I thought, well, does that justify turning them into a house? And I realize that there may be a policy issue here, but that doesn't overcome my concerns about consenting a house in the Greenbelt. And I think Councillor Dean has put this very eloquently. And also Mr. Chris Crouch, who was objecting. So I particularly wanted to pick up on that point because I think that it is relevant and that we need to have regard to it. I don't think I need to say any more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the unusual position of kind of agreeing with my colleague over there, who should look surprised. If there was a possibility of the equestrian uses being continued, which the chair of the parish council said, then I would be against it. But when I look at the hodgepodge of buildings that are there now that could well just become derelict, although I dislike the idea of building a house in the Greenbelt, I think it would be an improvement. And when I look at paragraph 149G, I would expect that planning inspector might give this the same weight as our officers do. So in the end, reluctantly, I think I'm for granting the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments? Okay, so we move to the recommendation which is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 to 11 and informatives 1 to 10. Could you please indicate if you're in favour of that recommendation?
Thank you, Chairman. That's a vote at 7 for and 4 against.
Sorry, thank you. We move on to item 8.3, WA 2022-01092, land at the Music Works, Godalming. And the proposal is that the application under section 73 for removal of conditions 4 and 8 of permission reference WA 2021-02518, which concerns opening hours and restriction on congregation numbers. And I'd ask Lara to present the.
Sorry, Chair, should we let Councillor Goodrich back in?
Thank you, Chair. Am I okay to start? Is everyone back in the room?
They are indeed. Please proceed. Thank you.
This application proposes the removal of conditions 4 and 8 relating to opening hours and the restriction of the number of worshippers at the Music Works in Milford. Condition 4 reads, the use hereby permitted shall not operate outside the hours of 10 AM till 8 PM Monday to Fridays, 8 AM to 5 PM on Saturdays, and 8 AM to 6 PM on Sundays. The use shall not operate bank holidays or recognised public holidays, excluding Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, Good Friday, and Christmas Day. Condition 8 reads, the congregation shall not exceed 30 persons at any one time. No variation shall take place without the prior written approval of the local planning authority. The next slide shows the location plan. I may add that there are no new plans have been submitted with this application. So these are a revision showing you the plans again for the 2021 applications to refresh your memory. This is the location plan with the site outlined in red. The site is positioned on the corner of the Portsmouth Road and New Road. The next slide shows an aerial photograph, as you can see with the red arrow shown centrally within the photograph. The next slide shows some site photographs. These are taken opposite New Road. And the next slide on the left-hand side is the view looking down New Road. And the photograph on the right-hand side is taken from across the Portsmouth Road looking into the site. The next slide shows the proposed elevations. Like I say, there are no changes to these proposed elevations. These are the previously approved elevations under the 2021 application. The next slide provides a comparison of the existing block plan on site and the proposed block plan, demonstrating an increase from 8 parking spaces to 12 parking spaces and a reduction in the size of the building on site to accommodate these parking spaces. The key matters for consideration are design and visual amenity, impact on the rural settlement, impact on residential amenity and parking. Officers consider that the removal of conditions 4 and 8 would be acceptable, and there are sufficient other measures controlled via way of condition to control concerns over residential amenity and parking on site, and therefore officers are recommending approval. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Again, we've got public speaking, so I would first ask Louise Gallagher to speak on behalf of the objectors.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
We can indeed. Yes, please.
Thank you. So I'm here to represent the 20 objectors in New Road, and I live directly opposite the premises at number 2. Firstly, I'd like to say that the applicant bought the building with these conditions on it and should respect the reasons for these conditions. Recent planning permission was also agreed based on these conditions being in place and to protect the residents' rights. With regards to condition 4, the operating hours, I mean, currently when they arrive and leave the building, there are car doors banging and people chatting outside. I see no evidence of car sharing, walking or cycling as mentioned by at least 3 of the supporters. I witnessed a maximum of 4 people in one car, which I presume was a family. Mostly others arrived with 2 people in the car. The car park was full of cars during Sunday worship. I have observed this on numerous occasions whilst living at this address. So by removing this condition, does it mean that anyone can attend the premises at any time of the day or night or any day of the week, making noise and disruption as they so wish? Moving on to condition 8, not exceeding 30 people at any one time. How can they justify more than 30 people in the building when they only have 12 car parking spaces? This will definitely impact on the parking in New Road. The applicant's parking management plan states that they will avoid spaces outside residential properties, but there are none. Residents currently already use all available spaces. It also states that there are significant on-street spaces available which are not outside residential properties. We don't believe this to be the case, as residents are fully utilising any available spaces. So I feel that this is very misleading. Therefore, based on the above, I would urge the council to protect the residents by upholding these conditions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And now invite Matt Smith to speak in support of the application.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Matt Smith. I'm an associate at D&M Planning Limited and speaking tonight on behalf of the applicant, the Shepherd's Meads Trust, which is the charitable arm of the local Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank officers for their positive recommendation outlined in detail within the committee report. Some members may remember me talking to this committee in October 2020 regarding 23 Bourne Road in Farncombe. That application was also in regards to a meeting hall for the Plymouth Brethren, and that specific application sought the removal of conditions which controlled the hours of use. Members voted overwhelmingly in favour of that application. The application before you is with regards to a near identical meeting hall in an area similarly located within proximity to neighbouring residential properties, commercial businesses and transport infrastructure. I would remind members of their obligation set out within the NPPG to determine applications in a consistent manner. This application proposes the removal of 2 conditions. The first is the restriction of hours of use as it was at 23 Bourne Road, and the second is the limitation on the number of persons permitted to be within the congregation. This limit is currently for 30 persons, and I would highlight that such a condition was not included on the application in Farncombe. The 2 conditions have been discussed at length by committee in both October 2019 and again in December 2021. In both committees, members sought to include the conditions after deliberation with specific reference to the impact on the proposal on the amenity of neighbours, particularly in regards to on-street parking and highway amenity. The limit on the congregation was at the request of members during the initial application in 2019. That application proposed the change of use of the building in its current form to a place of worship. That application had provision for 6 parking spaces with a further 2 in tandem. The subsequent application determined last year proposed the demolition of this building and the erection of a meeting hall approximately 50% smaller than the existing building. As a result of this reduction, the parking provision also increased to 12 spaces. The Waverley Borough Council parking standards state that for non-residential development, the guidance is not expressed as a minimum or a maximum, instead that they are what is normally expected. The guidance at Appendix 1 is for 1 space per 10 seats. If parking and highway amenity is utilised to limit the number of persons within the congregation, the only justifiable number therefore is 120 persons. I would again stress that this is the Waverley parking standards. This is notwithstanding the lack of objection from Surrey County Council. In terms of the hours of operation, we would highlight that the current restrictions strongly limit the freedom of those within the congregation of their right to worship. These restrictions are not proposed on other places of worship or of other denominations or faiths. I would emphasise at this stage that the Brethren meet at a similar time around the world, namely in the evening for worship and at 6 AM for Holy Communion on a Sunday and religious holidays. The current hours of operations not only limit the right of expression, but would prevent other occurrences such as cleaning, administrative or clerical work, Bible study, preparation for services, and importantly, the right for private worship or pastoral care. Times of crisis or times when individuals need to seek spiritual enrichment do not only happen between the conditioned hours. In these times, individual members or families within the congregation may wish to undertake private prayer or seek pastoral care. The conditioned hours prevent not only the denomination worshipping as they do around the world, but fundamentally limit the effective use of this building for the community in which it serves. I would finally emphasise to members that the NPPF and the NPPG set out a number of tests which every condition must meet to be recognised as valid. As set out extensively in the submitted planning statement, it is my professional opinion that 2 conditions fail such tests and if included would be invalid. Thank you for listening, and again to officers for their positive recommendation.
Thank you. And now, before I throw this open to the committee, the chairman of this committee, Councillor Penny Rivers, has asked for a statement from her to be read out by, I think, Lara. Lara, have you got details? It's all gone quiet, so perhaps I'll read it out. She is not the ward member, she is chairman of this committee, and there is no substitute in her place.
I just wanted to clarify
yeah.
as to whether that, by enabling that to happen, that means that any member of this committee, whether or not substitute, would be enabled in the future to be able to contribute a statement on any gap.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's in order, and I don't see a problem with it. Sorry, apologies. I think that this is in order.
I think it's an important distinction.
Yeah, sorry, through you, Chair. Yes, I think it does.
Right, so this is what Councillor Penny Rivers has asked me to read out. In regard to the Music Works Milford, the proposal is for the removal of conditions 4 and 8 of WA 2021-02518. Condition 4 limits the hours and precludes a 6 AM time of worship. Condition 8 limits the size of the congregation to 30 people. Officers recommend no objection, and I support that view. Both conditions are inappropriate and are not sustainable. The proposed building is a reduction on the footprint of the existing structure, and its size itself limits the number of the congregation, and it enables an increase in the number of parking spaces. So no objection to the removal of condition 8. That's Councillor Rivers. All over the world, brethren start their Sunday worship at 6 AM. Freedom of religion is a human right. Article 9 states we all have the right to our own religion and to practice without discrimination those benefits by worshipping and teaching in public and in private. There are no conditions on times of services at any other church in the local area, and there must not be one on this. So no objection to the removal of condition 4. Furthermore, I argue that WBC has already set a precedent by granting planning permission for the worship hall at 23 Bourne Road, Farncombe, where there have been no complaints about excessive traffic and noise. So I urge that you vote in support of the removal of these 2 conditions. Right, I'll now throw it open, and Councillor Gale wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the ward councillor for Milford, and I have been contacted by many residents in New Road because obviously this was talked about and discussed a lot when this application came in. Nobody's denying that the new building is going to be a bit of a blessing because what is there, you couldn't make it any worse. However, New Road is really narrow. There is no off-street parking for many of the homes in New Road, and there has been a lot of back garden development. And although those back garden developments have issued small parking spaces, very rarely they're used. To take away the two conditions which were discussed at length when we looked at this application last, I think is an error. The road would have a lot more noise in it if these conditions were removed. There are only 12 parking spaces for 30 people, which, okay, you can squeeze a couple of people in each car, 3 in some, and they can all park within the compound that's there. However, if you open up this congregation to more people, you're going to have a lot more cars, and there really is nowhere for them to park without not to the detriment of the people that actually live there. I know some councillors are going to say that there are other places within Waverley where these types of facilities are used at different hours to what is actually restricted on this one. And they do that harmoniously, but that doesn't mean that it would be harmonious to New Road in Milford. Yes, I understand that people have worshipping hours, but this building was taken on without those types of opening hours. And I don't think we should be removing them, because I don't think it would be a very good thing for anybody in that road to have worshipping going on at that hour of the morning. But thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you. Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I do know New Road pretty well. I lived right at the top of New Road at the junction with the Cedars for many, many years. And I'm very aware of the parking problems in that particular road. A lot, as I think all councillors alluded to do with the fact that a significant number of houses do not have parking, and although some of them have now been able to park at the back, I don't think you're ever going to quite solve the problem there. So that's the context and the background. But I think what we've got to do is look at this application on its merits, and there's nothing inconsistent about what I'm going to say, because both in respect of 2 previous applications that have been before this committee, I've argued very strongly along similar lines to those that Penny Rivers does. Now, we come from a pretty different perspective. I know Penny has church and religious affiliations. I do not have those, but I respect absolutely the right of people of faith who seek to worship to be given the opportunity to do so appropriately and at the time that is appropriate to them. The Plymouth Brethren in particular, as has been referred to, do have, as part of their practice, they seek an opportunity to try and worship at the same time as others in other parts of the world, which does mean, perhaps early starts sometimes at 6 o'clock and things of that kind. And I just couldn't sit here with any conscience and actually say that for what I don't think is going to be an issue in any event, seriously, because the highways people have not objected. We're now going to have additional parking spaces on the site. I don't think in all conscience I could not agree to the removal of these conditions, because it fetters a right that I think is important and fundamental, and there is nothing that I can see that is so overwhelming that would compel us to actually take that away. I did, as I say, I am being consistent. I didn't support the conditions and along with Penny Rivers and others, I spoke about the Farncombe facility and the Bournemouth one previously. And I think we do have to be consistent about this, but even in the context just of this application, which we have to consider, I don't think there is a case that would enable us not, frankly, to not remove those conditions. It would not be appropriate.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we can probably all agree, I hope, that the parking issues in that road are really not in dispute. There are definitely issues there. Like Councillor Costa, though, I was here for the matter in Farncombe, and actually for that particular debate, I think we had a good 15-20 residents in the public gallery for it. Many of whom expressed the same concerns that the original objector speaking tonight put forward, and many of them quite vocal about those objections. I've had some of those objections raised in my capacity as a county councillor as well, and I'm glad they've been aired. But in reality, myself and Penny, and I know Councillor Costa as well, those residents that were here for the Farncombe application, which of course is the same religious group, I probably should flag I'm not religious at all either. those residents kept in very good contact with many of us, because we wanted to make sure that if the concerns that they were worried about did in fact manifest themselves, that there would be some recourse through the processes we have here. I have had absolutely no issues raised by any of those residents in Farncombe since those changes occurred. I mean, I'll look to the other Godalming councillors, and particularly Councillor Wilson as one of the councillors for Farncombe, to see if he had any, but have received none from any resident, because it seems that none of those issues have manifested, or where they have, they've dealt with them with the community amicably and reasonably. Going back to one of Councillor Costa's other points, I do think we'd be on slightly dubious ground if we were to restrict active worship hours for one particular group over another. I think there's probably some concerns about how that would be challenged legally, almost certainly, in terms of its potential for discrimination that abounds through that issue. But I think that I would just like to just once again give that reassurance to residents in this particular application, that I don't imagine it will manifest in the way that we fear it could. I think in Farncombe, quite a lot of people do come down. They get dropped off. They come in carpooling as much as they can, and it doesn't end up manifesting in the ways that people feared. I would imagine, as it's the same group, that a good relationship can be built up to resolve any issues that do come off it. So I'm afraid I need to maintain a consistent approach as well, and one will support the removal of these conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, having been given the introduction.
I actually was at that meeting and I spoke up for them. And one thing which Councillor Costa and I both raised, the Plymouth Brethren in Farncombe in particular, a lot of us lived there for an exceedingly long time before we realized that they were there. And they are, I believe they had, when the Way Court got flooded, they were about the first people to race forward and help. They are quiet, they are kind, and I thought that they would have trouble because they got a pub up the road. Now I looked at this and I thought they have gone out of their way. They have reduced the size of the building. I don't know how many it'll hold, but it's not going to be the 120, I wouldn't think. The Plymouth Brethren basically are born into the Plymouth Brethren. They don't go out evangelizing. They don't drag thousands of people into their services. They quietly get on with them. I think at the time that we made those conditions, there was a good reason. I think now that they've taken this step with the new building and more parking spaces, that, as my colleagues have said, I think the community will be quite glad they're there if they're in trouble and won't notice if they're not. So I too support removing the conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Like you, I live very near the Lower Manor Road temple that they had before, and I had no idea they were there. So. Yeah.
Can I add just one point for my colleagues? How many of our established churches would be built if they had these conditions imposed on them? I can think of many with no parking, and certainly they are encouraged to go and look for congregations.
Thank you. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the main issue that seems to be raised by objectors is the parking. The applicant's agent has mentioned our council's parking guidelines, and it's in our report on page 53. It seems from a planning point of view, to raise the issue of parking, we're on a hiding to nothing. Because if our policy guidelines indicate one parking space should be available for every 10 worshippers, and that is our policy, in theory, they only need 3 parking spaces. Now, they're providing 12, and I don't know how many can fit in the smaller new development, but it seems to me that if we put on a condition restricting the number of parking spaces totally contrary to our own parking guidelines, we would be in some trouble. And therefore, I raise that, and I agree entirely with Councillor Follows and Cossa and the chairman in her absence. I think it's right to remove these conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you, Chair. Well, I would like us to look at the site, because it is sites, I believe, that get consent. And this site is an area where there are, as Councillor Gale has said, real parking problems, because the houses were built before parking was thought of or required. So you already have a site where there are difficulties. And I'm quite sure, in fact, that the members of the committee who agreed this consent with conditions 1 and 4 were doing so in order to make the proposed use now acceptable, and to try and overcome the problems that do exist. And because I wanted to get some more information about parking management plans, I must say I had a great deal of help from our officer, Lara Davison, and Richard Cooper and Matt Strong at Highways. I have actually been sent sample parking management plans, and I can tell you that they rely entirely on goodwill. And I think that the members of this committee, which I was not able to attend in December, were aware of this, which is why they imposed conditions which would actually be more effective than a parking management plan, where I don't see any sanctions actually being possible if there are breaches of those plans. And I'm a churchgoer myself, so I would hope that there would be goodwill there, but we can't be sure of that. And it seems to me that it would be more sensible and transparent if we did not do away with those conditions. They were imposed for a reason. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any further comments? So we move to the recommendation that permission be granted subject to, no, is that the right one? Yeah, subject to conditions 1 to 8 and informatives 1 to 6. All those in favour of that recommendation? And those against? 2. Abstention? 1.
Thank you, Chairman. That was 9 for, 2 against and 1 abstention.
Right, so that recommendation is carried. We move on to item 9.1, reference WA 2021-01856, land east of Loxwood Road, Alfold. So this is certainly, Councillor. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break. Okay, members, if we can resume, please. Councillor Baker has stepped out of the room. Okay, so we move on to whatever it was I said before. WA 2021-01856, land east of Loxford Road, Alfold, and the proposal approval of reserve matters following outline permission. And this is one of those where they've gone to appeal for non-determination, and we need to tell them what we might have said if we'd been given the chance. So Ruth is going to give a précis of the former presentation, so I'll hand over.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so just before I go on to sort of covering a bit of detail about the application, the Chair has touched upon the fact that you're not actually making a decision as such on this application tonight. Effectively, the application was previously considered at the committee on the 9th of March, and that at that committee, members decided to defer the application due to a number of concerns that they had with the scheme. The applicant has now sought non-determination of the application, so it is at appeal, and this means that the council can no longer make the decision, and the decision will be in the hands of the planning inspectorate. However, for the purposes of the appeal, the council needs to establish its position on the application. So this could either be that the council decide to approve the application this evening, or that they would have approved the application had they had the opportunity to determine it, or it could be that the council decides tonight that had they had the opportunity to determine it, they would have refused it. If the committee decide tonight that they would have refused it, we need to establish what the reasons for refusal would be, so it is clear what we're contesting at the appeal. Hopefully that is clear. So lots of you will have seen the presentation previously at committee on the 9th of March. So I'm really just going to sort of give you some quick reminders effectively rather than going into detail. So the site is to the east of Loxwood Road, and it is accessed here. So going through an existing development and Sweetersfield Road. And this is just an aerial that provides you with more context, and the application site runs across there and then runs up along here. The application, so an outline application was approved in 2019 on appeal for a development of up to 80 dwellings. And the plan on your left is the parameter plan that was approved as part of that outline application. And effectively, just to remind you of a couple of the principles that were established. One is that the access would be via Sweetersfield Road, as you can see on that parameter plan. It also set the areas of the site for built development, which is everything you can see in yellow, and everything that is in white were effectively designated as sort of areas of open and green space. Building heights were to be no higher than 9.5 metres, and there was also no requirement to provide a leap, as the adjacent development at Sweeters Copse has a leap, which is just here. And there was also a requirement for them to provide a reptile mitigation area. The proposed layout plan is on the right, and you can see that that effectively broadly across the parameter plan in terms of where development would be located and where the green spaces would be, and that was the plan that was considered at the 9th of March committee. Rather than getting up all the elevations, I just pulled out some street scene plans, so just to remind you of what the houses would look like, and just also to touch upon the fact, because it was one of the reasons for deferral, that they were proposing this flatted building here. So the reasons for deferral were, there are a number of concerns relating to the site design and layout of the development, the road layout, the clusters of affordable housing. It was felt that although the houses are in clusters of 10, which is in accordance with our affordable housing guidance, that those clusters were effectively too close together on the site, loss of amenity to 15 Chiltern Close, the lack of a leap or lap provision, safety issues arising from the gas refilling lorries, the design of the flatted building, which I showed you in the previous slide, and also councillors wanted further information regarding the location of the ground horse heat pumps and the location and types of external lighting. So I hand over to councillors to consider what they would have done had they had the opportunity to determine the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ruth. Yes, members, and Councillor Dinas has his hand up first of all.
Thank you very much. So accepting there'll be 80 houses, which was granted on appeal, we have a responsibility to ensure a quality application that's submitted and one that stands the test of time and one we can be proud of. So when we consider this on the 9th of March, I said this was probably the worst application I'd seen in 7 years on this committee, and it still holds that accolade. So where are we at this current time? Well, after the committee, I've met with Bewley on several occasions, and the community have worked really hard with Bewley. They apologised for the quality of the application, and they apologised for the lack of engagement with the community and said it wasn't their ethos and they hadn't done themselves proud. So they were quite open how poor they felt they had been. So in the last few months, there's been numerous meetings and there is a proposed new layout. Now I've seen that, and almost all of the points that we raised as our concerns, they've agreed to address. So that huge building, which is about 100 foot by 100 foot in the L shape, that's gone. The lack of amenities to 15 Chiltern Close, which was the car parking spaces, they've agreed to do that. We raised concerns about Calagas. They've said that they will go to modern technology to provide the heating. So virtually everything that we raised concerns, they've agreed to amend. It's a shame they couldn't have done that in the first place. So I just will go through some of those reasons, and maybe Ruth will be kind enough to put the reasons for the deferral, just so I can make sure I cover them. So, and the officer's report, page 61. So we raised concerns about the block of flats, and as I said, it's about 100 foot by 100 foot as an L-shaped. And as I said on the night, this is not what a rural village character is. It's more like an inner city. The road layout was bland, I think we said was boring. And again, they have amended that. They've made it a lot more rural. And the plan totally fails to reflect the local character of Alfold. As been raised by Ruth, we raised concerns about affordable housing in clusters, because there's nothing like identifying where your affordable housing is in a new estate. The car parking layout was awful, and the residents of 15 Chiltern Close would have up to 18 parking spaces facing onto their garden. And those who went on the original site visit, remember, it was onto open fields, and you're suddenly going to have 18 spaces. Great when it's doors slamming, fumes in their garden, cars warming up and scraping the cars during the winter. Again, this has been addressed in what they say their proposed new application will be. That's more, this one here is more like an NCP car park than a rural village. There was no lap or leap, which was unacceptable, but it was raised, well, Sweetest Cops has got one. That is a privately owned, I don't know if it's a lap or leap, because I never can remember. And the Residents Association have said, you can't use ours because we pay for it. And I think Bewley have recognised it, and I believe they are going to put one on their area. So again, that's been done. It has been mentioned about the Calagas. I don't see that as an issue, because if the new application takes that out, but it would have been quite a dangerous thing, because a Calagas tanker, where the tanks are, would have blocked it for about an hour to 2 hours, and actually effectively blocking people coming out of the new estate. We raised the fact that the design of many buildings, including the flatted building, were uninspiring. I mean, some of the rear elevations were really poor, and certainly not in character for a rural area. And it sticks out like a sore thumb. And I said on the night, and I said again, the residents of All deserve far better. And we did take our responsibilities seriously, and we deferred it, and we've given them time to reconsider their application. I do think it's a shame they've done a twin-tracked approach by non-determination whilst putting a new application, because it's a lot of officers' time and members' time, but we are where we are. I think there's numerous policies that have been breached. The intrinsic nature and beauty of the countryside hasn't been recognised and safeguarded. Respect and appropriate enhanced distinctive character of the landscape. Well, having a 100-foot by 100-foot building hardly does that. I think there's issues about biodiversity, about protecting and enhancing features of biodiversity. I think there's breaches in policies about CC1 and CC2, which is about climate change, to promote sustainable patterns of development to reduce levels of greenhouse gas emissions. I think the new plan will do that. And, you know, I could go on and on and on. I'm sure my colleagues would not want me to. Nothing has changed since we looked at it, because it's the same plan. We thought it was a poor plan then. It's still a poor plan. But I'm hopeful that the new plan, which I think will be in within the next month or so, if not already, and Ruth might be able to confirm if it's actually been submitted, is a vast improvement. And that is what that deferment has allowed us. But it does mean we cannot, you know, hopefully support this. I certainly won't be. And we must let this new plan come to fruition. Thank you, Chair. If there's any points I need to come back, I will. But
I'm sure you will, if I let you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to repeat what Councillor Dinas has said in the main, other than to agree wholeheartedly that we must, of course, stick to our guns on this particular application. It is a shame that they are taking this particular tack, but as the board member has said, the one that we are expecting should be an order of magnitude better. It again shows us why we should sometimes hold our ground when it comes to certain developers when we see that. But it also is very much worth saying that this developer does seem to have listened. And I think it's probably worth me saying that not only have they listened here, but it seems to be as a result, they're also starting to listen in Milford as well, which is a very welcome sign. So I completely agree with Councillor Dinas's points. Obviously want to sustain the original objections for the original plan, because it was absolutely one of the worst ones I've ever seen as well. But hopeful for the successor. I think that's it shows one of the reasons why we're here, and I think we've done a good job with what we've done here. And thank you to the officers for taking that forward in the way that they have. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Cossa.
Very, very briefly to say, I'm really pleased to hear about the progress that's been made. Share what everyone said. I'm not going to repeat anything that Kevin said. I went on the site visit, and it really was not acceptable, and pleased to hear it. I just hope we can move quickly now to a point, if there is a clear consensus, I hope, in the committee, that we should oppose this, and translate that into the words that we need to use for our, you know, with the help of our officers and for the use of our officers, we can find the right words to translate those concerns into the appropriate language.
Thank you. Any further comments? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson. Yes, I have got.
Just one thing. I think that we gave them a chance to sort it out by deferring it, which is why we deferred it. I think on all these points, we could have quite happily refused it. And I think the inspector would have agreed with us. So I think they're really taking the mickey, and they're costing us money, which we haven't got. I too say refusal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Happy to move to the recommendation then. So the recommendation is that had the committee been in a position to determine the application, recommendation A, that subject to the completion of a deed of variation by the 9th of September 22 to secure amendments to the affordable housing mix, market housing mix and location of the LAP, the reserved matters of layout, scale, appearance and landscaping would have been approved subject to conditions and the completion of a deed of variation. All those in favour? Oh no, Ruth's looking a bit panicky there.
Thank you, Chair. I think actually it's probably more true to say that we're not, as officers, we're not necessarily making a recommendation at this committee. So our recommendation on the 9th of March was for approval. You as a committee chose to defer it. And so as such, the report from the previous committee was appended, but there is actually no recommendation on this evening. Yeah, so the reasons for yes, in the minutes for the 9th March committee, the reasons for deferral are clearly minuted.
Okay, fine. So where does that leave us then?
Do I make a recommendation that we refuse then, and then we just vote on that?
Yes, Ruth?
Yeah, sorry,
yes?
Chair. So
Okay.
my understanding is that effectively, if you can choose to say that you would have refused it, if you had been given the opportunity, and then work through what the reasons for refusal would have been.
Okay, can I have a proposal for refusal and a seconder, please? Councillor follows, right. So proposed by Kevin Dean, seconded by Paul Follows. All those in favour of refusing this application, should we have been given the opportunity? We will do in a minute. I think it's fairly. Against? Abstention? Right, so reasons. I mean, we have the reasons that we deferred this before.
I'm quite happy to give it a go, and I'm sure my colleagues will change the wording.
Do you wish to speak, Ruth?
Yes, if I could. So, knowing what the deferral reasons were from the 9th of March committee, I suppose maybe if we go through each of these ones that are listed, decide if you still want to refuse on that basis, because then I have, in anticipation of what might come up, having looked at that list, I can then offer potential reasons for refusal. Does that sound the best way to do it?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, this is the first time I've been in this situation, so it's quite new to me. So size, design and layout of development, are we saying would form a reason for refusal? Okay, so I've sort of split that into two. So presumably we also have the design of the flatted building further down the list. So I'll give you the two reasons that I've got that sort of incorporate those. So the first one is the proposed development, by reason of its density, layout and scale, would have a cramped and crowded appearance that would be out of keeping with the character of the area and would have a harmful impact on visual amenity, contrary to policy TD1 of the local plan part 1 2018 and policies D1 and D4 of the local plan 2002. And the second design related refusal is the design of the dwellings, particularly the flatted building, would be out of keeping with the character and appearance of the area and would have a harmful impact on visual amenity, contrary to policy TD1 of the local plan part 1 2018 and policies D1 and D4 of the local plan 2002.
Road layout.
Road layout, I have to confess I haven't compiled a reason for refusal for, because I'm not convinced that that makes a reason for refusal, and it's more about how that gets wrapped up, I suppose, within the first reason for refusal about the layout, which included layout. So I think the first reason for refusal probably covers off road layout.
Well, we weren't happy with the parking courts. Would that come under road layout?
Well, okay, so what in the first reason for refusal, I could put the proposed development by reason of its density, layout in brackets, including prevalence of parking courts.
And clustering of the car parking.
And amenity.
Yeah, including layout, including parking layout. Okay. So clusters of affordable housing, we have to be slightly careful here because they're clustered in groups of 10, and our affordable housing SPD allows a maximum of clusters of 10. So it might be worth me going back to the layout plan, because then I think it would be an issue of whether you feel those clusters, it's an issue of the clusters being too close to each other rather than the clusters themselves being too big. So if we're saying that, then that reason for refusal would be that the proposed development would not provide a mixed and balanced community as a result of the poor distribution of affordable housing within the development, contrary to paragraph 63 of the MPPF 2021 and Waverley's Affordable Housing Supplementary Planning Document, April 2021. And I think the reason why we can refer to Waverley's Affordable Housing Supplementary Planning Document is, although the clusters are in 10, it talks about the affordable housing being well integrated. So if we can talk about the fact that although they're in clusters in 10, they're too close together, so it's not well integrated. Everyone happy? Okay. Loss of amenity for Chiltern Close. The proposed development by virtue of the provision of car parking spaces adjacent to the boundary of number 15 Chiltern Close would have a harmful impact on that property with regard to noise and general disturbance, contrary to policy TD1 of the local plan part 1 2018 and policies D1 and D4 of the local plan 2002. So then we've got the lack of the lap or the leap. So there is a lap in the development within the centre of the site. What the development lacks is the leap. I would add a serious note of caution of refusing the development on these grounds on the basis that the development not having a leap was a matter of principle that was agreed with the outline planning commission. So from a planning perspective, I would say, and I know there are concerns about whether residents will actually be able to access that leap, but that is a matter that's outside the remit of planning. But the fact is we have an outline planning permission that allows them to develop the site without providing a leap.
Yeah, I mean, clearly contractual matters are not our concern. Can we somehow incorporate the fact that it's a condition that they do use the one that's there in this development next door? In other words, it's a condition that they use that leap. And of course, if the owners of that leap say, keep off our leap, they can't comply with that condition. Question mark.
These are reasons for refusal, though, aren't they? It's not a restricted condition that we would put on a permission.
Also, even if we were going to, if we were going to approve it and go down that route, that we couldn't apply that condition because it's on land that's outside the applicant's control.
I mean, the whole thing is bonkers, because if you said, right, that house isn't going to have a garden, but they can use the people down the road's garden, and the people down the road say, no, you can't use our garden. We say, well, I'm sorry, we gave outline permission for the, it's all a bit, Councillor Costa.
Just wanted to explore very briefly whether so I just wanted. Sorry, for a slightly different point, I only wanted to explore whether at the outline stage, whether the permission granted was based on a belief, based on apparently some evidence that they would be able to use that player as a leap, and therefore, I know it's tricky ground, but whether it's possible to challenge it by demonstrating that that was erroneous and therefore has left the planning, left us in this difficult position.
I wasn't party to that appeal, and what specifically was advanced as arguments. I think, but as far as I know, I think the appellants effectively put forward the argument that it could be used. I'm not convinced that there was a level of detail that was given as to whether that would be the reality of the situation. I mean, I've got a reason for refusal here for it, and we could advance the argument that we have more information about that. And there now is a distinct possibility that the occupiers of the Sweeters Copse development are going to limit access, and on that basis, it's no longer an acceptable planning approach for this development not to have a leap. It may present problems, but
take us forward, Chairman. I really don't think we want clearly to get ourselves into a position in which we're putting our planning officers in this on any difficulty. But I wondered if outside of our recommendation, we could suggest, or maybe even put in our recommendation, that our planning officers be given an opportunity to explore this point in a little more detail. And if they do feel that it is possible and appropriate to put that condition in, they do so. I'm just a bit worried that you know, we have been put in this position. My instinct is, but without any knowledge, that it has been done on a mistaken assumption that the submission by the applicant was wrong, mischievously or otherwise, I don't know. And it just seems a bit awful if we can't actually in some way draw attention to it. But if that's going to put our position in difficulty, I would not wish to pursue it.
Again, it comes down to we're finding reasons for refusal rather than conditions to a permission, aren't we? So, yeah, Councillor Denis, you wish to comment?
Yeah, I had that painful experience of being at the inquiry and how we performed on the day, but that's another story for another day. When looking at this earlier, I had some wording which said something along the lines that the proposal that fails to provide an on-site leap will therefore fail to provide adequate recreation facilities for future occupiers in conflict with policies LRC 1 and Local Plan 2018. It was muted at that they would be using that one, but of course, like you say, you can't give permission for something you don't own. So I think we should put something, and I wonder whether that policy LRC 1 Local Plan 2018 does cover that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So that all sounded very good, but shall I tell you what I've written down, because then it might just be easier. So it's very similar. The proposed development is deficient in play-space provision due to lack of provision of locally equipped area of play on the site itself, harmful to the amenities of future occupiers, contrary to policies TD1 and LRC1 of the Local Plan Part 1 2018. That just makes my admin easier. Yes, to be honest, I would say that this is a matter that doesn't really fall within the remit of planning. It would be something that is much more for health and safety, effectively. We've incorporated the design of the flatted building, and then actually the last bullet point was less about, well, I suppose it arose out of concerns, but it was more about wanting more information about ground source heat pumps and the location and types of external lighting. So just to say that on the external lighting, there was a condition on the outline permission, or there is a condition on the outline permission that requires details of external lighting to be submitted. There were concerns at the committee because they had submitted lighting plans with the application that showed sort of 5 metre high street lights effectively, but they were not, those plans were not going to be approved as part of the reserve matters, because it had been made clear to them that wouldn't necessarily be acceptable. And so the lighting can still be dealt with under the condition on the original outline application. So the detail could come forward under that. And in terms of the ground source heat pumps, I still don't have any further information as to where they are. I mean, they have given me some information on sustainability that I can impart to the committee, if you like.
Personally, I think it's rather a weak reason for refusal. It's the sort of thing that could be covered by if we'd given them permission, we could have put a condition on that details of ground source heat pump should be submitted before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Councillor Dinas.
I had written something which maybe will help, maybe will not. The application provides sufficient information about sustainability measures that will be put in place to demonstrate proposal's ability to mitigate and adapt to the impacts of climate change and the council's declaration of a climate emergency, promote a sustainable pattern of development and reduce levels of greenhouse gas emissions. This would fail to conflict with policy CC1 and CC2 of the local plan 2018 part 1 and paragraph 154 of the MPPF 2021. I don't know if that's of help or not.
Yes, I think some of that's of help. I think there are just a couple of things I'd want to say on this, and that is, firstly, there are some sustainability measures that are incorporated into the scheme, such as vehicle charging points. We would normally put a condition on to limit, to have water restrictions to 110 litres. There are building reg standards that mean that you have to have a certain degree of insulation and achieve certain thermal efficiencies. So although we didn't have very explicit detail on this application about the sustainability measures, they will have to accord with the measures set out in building regulations that are actually changing this month to be even more stringent. I think just the only other thing I would say is I don't think we could refuse it on policy CC1 because the wording of that policy is that development will be supported where it contributes to mitigating and adapting to the impacts of climate change. It's not a requirement that you have to mitigate and adapt. You could potentially refuse it on CC2, which talks about, I'll just read that to you, the council will seek to promote sustainable patterns of development and reduce level of greenhouse gas emissions by ensuring all new development, including residential extensions, include measures to minimise energy and water use through its design, layout, landscape and orientation. That's just the top criteria of CC2. So I would suggest you can't refuse on CC1, you could refuse on CC2. I wouldn't necessarily reference the fact that we've declared a climate emergency as a council because that isn't a planning policy and we need to hinge on planning policies.
As our deferral reason was the location of the ground source heat pumps, I think that any reference to the environment is a bit spurious, isn't it? Because all we're asking them to say is where are you going to put these ground source heat pumps? Councillor Goodridge.
I've always understood that if you're going to refuse an application, have 2 or 3 good reasons for refusal and keep it at that. I think we're going over the top. If we are right that they're about to put in a decent planning application, all they need is the ones that we've come up with already, which is a sufficient artillery across their bows to say you're going to have trouble if you try to push this one through. I would have thought that once they receive this result with the application, with the reasons we've already stipulated, that will be sufficient that we'll never see this application at appeal and that we'll have a new application when we can get our teeth into something decent.
I agree. Councillor Costa.
Very briefly, I was just going to make exactly the same point. I happened to see recently something that somebody sent me, which was a very interesting discussion between some very senior planning barristers who practice regularly, and they made exactly that point, that too many authorities in refusing applications try and throw too many things at it and it doesn't help their case. In this event, as Councillor Goodridge just said, hopefully the excellent work that Councillor Dinas and the residents have been doing, I mean, we won't be pursuing this, but who knows? But so let's do it.
So with that exception, are we happy with the reasons that we've discussed and Ruth has detailed? Yes, all those in favour? Very good. Okay, thank you. So that's dealt with that one. So item 9.2, reference WA 2022-00767, 98 Oxford Ridge, Godalming, extension and alterations to elevations. Susie.
Thank you, Chair. So this item has been brought to committee as it falls outside the scheme of delegation as the agent is related to a member of staff. This proposal is for a single-storey extension. The application site is located on the eastern side of Oxford Ridge. The property is a semi-detached two-storey dwelling with off-street parking. Aerial view of the property. The site photos show the front, rear and side of the property. The application proposes the erection of a single-storey side extension measuring 1.3 metres wide by 4.2 metres deep with a monopitch roof height of 3.7 metres. These are the existing and proposed elevations, front and rear and side. You can see that the proposed extension would join an existing side extension. And there's the plan, proposed and existing. So officers recommend approval, subject to conditions 1 and 2.
Thank you. Can I propose we go straight to the recommendation? Really good. So the recommendation is that permission be granted subject to conditions 1 and 2 and informative. All those in favour, please. Thank you. And oh, I think I've skipped one actually. Oh, we've got. Sorry, we've got next door, haven't we? Yeah. WA 2022-00766, land at 99 Oxford Ridge, Godalming. Susie.
Thank you, Chair. This item has been brought to committee as it falls outside the scheme of delegation as the agent is related to a member of staff. The proposals for a two-storey side and rear extension and single-storey rear extension. The application site is located on the eastern side of Oxford Ridge. The property is a semi-detached two-storey dwelling with off-street parking. This is an aerial view of the property location. The site photos show the front and rear and the neighbouring properties, looking towards the neighbouring properties. Block plan shows the two-storey side and rear extensions and single-storey rear extensions. So these are the existing and proposed front and rear elevations, and you can see that single-storey rear element adjacent to the neighbouring property, it's being brought down to single-storey to prevent the loss of light. And there's the side elevations and the existing and proposed ground floor and first floor. And officers recommendation is for approval subject to conditions 1 and 2.
Thank you. Same proposal, straight to the recommendation. All those in favour? Right. Thank you all for your attendance. I didn't quite beat Councillor Rivers' record of getting out of here by 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock even. But as we had a comfort break of 5 minutes, I think I can almost match her speed. Right. Thank you very much. Good night. Safe journey home.